Emma had always considered herself composed, a steady presence in a household that often felt fragmented. Married to Danny for 5 years, she had embraced her role as a stepmother to his son, Henry, with quiet determination. Danny's demanding career as a corporate executive frequently took him away, leaving Emma to manage the home and navigate the growing solitude that accompanied his absence. At first, Henry had been distant, polite, but reserved, keeping Emma at arm's length. But as the years passed and his visits from college became more frequent, their interactions shifted. He was no longer the awkward teenager she had first met, but a confident young man with an undeniable presence. His attentiveness and thoughtful nature made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Their home life had settled into a predictable rhythm, almost suffocating in its monotony. Danny's long absences left Emma feeling disconnected, each day blending into the next. She spent her time tending to the house, reading, and hosting formal dinners that felt more like obligations than genuine moments of connection. The warmth and intimacy she had once imagined in her marriage had faded into quiet distance. When Henry returned from university to live with them temporarily, the house took on an unfamiliar liveliness. He helped with household tasks, asked about her day, and listened, truly listened, when she spoke. At first, she dismissed it as simple kindness, but over time, she noticed a quiet intensity in his gaze, the way his words carried a weight that lingered. Emma tried to brush aside the subtle changes in their interactions, attributing them to her own loneliness. But as the days passed, she became acutely aware of the cracks forming in the life she had carefully constructed. She resented the thoughts creeping into her mind, the way her heart seemed to respond when Henry smiled at her. Outwardly, everything remained unchanged, but beneath the surface, something was shifting. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Emma finally spoke. "Henry, what's going on?" He met her gaze steadily. "What do you mean?" "You've been different," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. "I don't know what to make of it." Henry hesitated before leaning forward slightly. "Maybe I have been," he admitted. "Maybe I've been trying to tell you something." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how to respond, only that something unspoken was lingering between them. The weight of his words, the deliberate way he spoke, it all lingered in her thoughts long after the conversation ended. That night, she lay awake, replaying the moment over and over in her mind, searching for clarity in the confusion. The next morning, she resolved to keep her distance, throwing herself into housework in a futile attempt to quiet her thoughts. But as she scrubbed the kitchen counter, she heard Henry's voice behind her. "You don't have to do all that," he said lightly. Emma forced a smile before turning to face him. "Just keeping busy." He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You've been avoiding me." Her pulse quickened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do," he replied, his voice calm but insistent. "You felt it too, didn't you? That moment at the table last night." Emma's hands stilled. "Henry, stop. Whatever this is, it isn't right." "Why isn't it?" His voice was measured, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. "Because someone else says it's wrong? Or because you're afraid of what it means?" Emma turned to face him fully, her chest tightening. "Because you're my stepson," she said firmly. "And because this can't happen. It shouldn't happen." Henry's gaze remained steady. "But we both know something has changed." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Emma struggled to find the right words, to push aside the emotions swirling inside her. That evening, she retreated to her room, desperate for distance, but as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she couldn't silence the thoughts creeping into her mind. The next few days passed in a tense haze, filled with moments she didn't know how to process. And yet, no matter how much she tried to ignore it, she couldn't deny that something between them had shifted, altering the foundation of everything she thought she knew. Emma found Henry sitting in the dimly lit living room, the flickering light from the television casting shifting shadows across his face. When she entered, he glanced up, his expression softening. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She nodded, settling onto the opposite end of the couch. "No." The silence stretched between them, neither seeming willing to break it. After a while, Henry spoke. Do you ever feel like you're living a life that doesn't feel like your own? Emma turned to him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. Sometimes, she admitted. I think everyone feels that way at some point. Henry's gaze remained steady. I've felt like that for a long time. But not when I'm here. His words sent a ripple of unease through Emma. She hesitated, searching for the right response, but before she could speak, Henry shifted closer, his knee barely brushing hers. She felt a wave of warmth rise within her, unexpected and unsettling. Henry, she whispered, her voice trembling. This isn't. He didn't reply immediately, his gaze locked on hers, searching. She exhaled sharply, pushing herself up from the couch, putting much-needed distance between them. I need time to think, she said, her voice unsteady. Henry simply nodded, his expression unreadable. Emma retreated to her room, leaning against the closed door, heart pounding. She needed clarity, distance, something to pull her back to solid ground. But as she lay awake that night, sleep remained elusive, her mind replaying every moment of the evening. By morning, Emma resolved to focus on routine. She busied herself with household tasks, hoping that activity would dull the thoughts circling her mind. But when she finally ventured into the living room, Henry was already there, waiting. We need to talk, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. Henry nodded. I know. Emma took a steadying breath. Last night, what happened, it can't happen again. He studied her for a long moment. Why not? Because it's not right, Henry. You're my stepson. His expression didn't change. Lines drawn by other people don't always make sense. Emma shook her head. It doesn't matter. The lines are there for a reason. Henry leaned forward slightly. Did it feel like a mistake to you? He asked, his voice low. Emma's breath caught, and she looked away. I don't know what I'm feeling, she admitted. But I do know we can't keep doing this. Henry exhaled, his expression flickering with something unreadable. I don't want to ignore it. Before Emma could respond, the front door opened. Danny was home. Emma shot to her feet, heart racing as she tried to compose herself. Henry straightened as well, his face shifting into neutral calm. Hey, everyone, Danny said cheerfully, setting his briefcase down. He glanced between them. What's going on? Nothing, Emma said quickly, forcing a smile. We were just talking. Danny nodded, oblivious to the undercurrents in the room. Well, I'm glad to be home. It's been a long week. Excusing herself to the kitchen, Emma's hands trembled as she poured a glass of water. She could hear Danny and Henry talking in the living room, their voices easy, unaffected. As if nothing had changed. As if her world hadn't been quietly unraveling. That night, lying in bed, Emma felt the weight of everything settle over her. She couldn't go on pretending. A choice had to be made, one she wasn't sure she was strong enough to face. Danny's gaze lingered on Henry for a moment before shifting to Emma. And you? He asked. You've seemed distant. Emma forced a smile, her heart pounding. I'm fine, she said quickly, avoiding his eyes. Just tired. Danny nodded, but a flicker of suspicion crossed his face. She knew she wasn't hiding her emotions as well as she thought, and the fear of discovery gnawed at her with each passing day. The breaking point came one afternoon when Danny left for a work meeting. Emma was in the kitchen sorting through the mail when she heard Henry's voice behind her. We need to talk, he said. Emma turned, her stomach twisting. Henry, I can't do this, she whispered, her voice trembling. We can't keep having this conversation. I can't pretend like nothing happened, Henry replied firmly. And you can't either. Emma shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. We agreed it was a mistake. We have to move on. Have you? Henry asked, stepping closer. Because I haven't. I can't stop thinking about you. Henry, please, Emma pleaded, her voice breaking. You have to stop. Before they could say another word, the front door opened. Emma and Henry froze as Danny entered, looking between them, his brow furrowing. What's going on? Danny asked, his tone wary. Nothing, Emma said too quickly, her voice too high-pitched to be convincing. We were just talking. Danny's eyes narrowed. Talking about what? Henry kept his voice steady. Nothing important. Danny studied them for a long moment before turning away. Emma felt her knees weaken as she gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. That evening, Danny's demeanor changed. He was unusually attentive, watching Emma closely, asking pointed questions. His suspicion was growing, and Emma knew it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. The next morning, Emma found a note on the kitchen counter. Asterisk, we need to talk tonight. Don't wait up, asterisk. Her heart sank. The conversation she had been dreading was inevitable. That night, as they sat in the living room, Danny wasted no time. Emma, is there something you want to tell me? He asked, his voice calm but sharp. Emma's throat tightened. No, she said, barely above a whisper. Danny leaned forward. Are you sure? Because you've been acting different. And so has Henry. Emma couldn't hold back her tears. Danny, she stopped, unable to find the words. Just tell me the truth, Danny said, his voice rising. Whatever it is, I can take it. Before Emma could speak, Henry entered the room. Dad, he said, his voice steady. It's not her fault. Danny turned, his expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. What are you talking about? Henry hesitated before taking a deep breath. I'm the one who crossed the line. Emma didn't do anything wrong. Danny stared at him, his face tightening with anger. What are you saying? Henry didn't answer. The silence was deafening. Danny turned to Emma, his eyes filled with betrayal. Is this true? Emma couldn't speak. She only nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Danny stood abruptly, fists clenched. I need to leave, he said coldly. He grabbed his keys and walked out, slamming the door behind him. In the aftermath, the house felt empty. The weight of their choices pressed down on them, inescapable. The days following Danny's departure were some of the hardest Emma had ever endured. The once predictable routine of her life had shattered. Guilt and regret clung to her, an unrelenting presence. Henry tried to reach out, but Emma kept her distance, unable to face him without feeling the full weight of everything they had done. We need to talk, Henry said one afternoon, his voice heavy with emotion. Emma shook her head. There's nothing to talk about. We've already done enough damage. I never meant for this to happen, Henry said. I never wanted to hurt anyone. But we did, Emma snapped, her voice breaking. We hurt Danny. We hurt ourselves. And now we have to live with it. Henry's shoulders slumped. I'm sorry. For everything. In the weeks that followed, Emma focused on rebuilding her life. She sought therapy, unraveling the loneliness and neglect that had led her down such a destructive path. She realized that while Danny's emotional absence had been painful, it didn't justify her choices. Danny, too, agreed to couples therapy. Their sessions were raw and painful, forcing them to confront the cracks in their relationship. Danny admitted his work had consumed him, leaving little room for connection. Emma confessed her feelings of isolation and regret. There were no easy answers, but they were committed to trying. Henry moved out, renting a small apartment nearby. He sought his own therapy, determined to understand his actions and ensure he never repeated the same mistakes. Over time, he wrote a letter to Danny, apologizing and acknowledging the pain he had caused. Slowly, life began to stabilize. Emma and Danny worked on rebuilding trust. The scars of what had happened would always remain, but they learned to communicate more openly, addressing issues before they turned into something insurmountable. One evening, as Emma sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Danny joined her. They sat in silence for a while before she finally asked, "Do you think we'll ever be the same?" Danny exhaled. "No," he admitted. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we'll be better because of this." Emma nodded, her heart heavy yet hopeful. "I hope so." She had learned difficult lessons about boundaries, loneliness, and communication. She understood now that love wasn't about fleeting moments of connection, but about showing up, even when things were hard. It was about making choices that built trust, not destroyed it. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was hers to shape. And this time, she intended to do it right.